All right, guys, this is the first video about Marcus Garvey. This is going to be covering his early years. He was known as a political activist um, who was most known for wanting to, if you ask people, what they're going to tell you is Marcus Garvey wanted to send black people back to Africa. That's part of the story, obviously. Usually the full story isn't told, but that's what he's most known for. He actually had a shipping company called Black Star Line that he had specifically for this role, and it's called the Back to Africa movement that he was a part of, wanting to. And this is in the early 1900s, wanting to send blacks back to Africa, where obviously it was thought that they would have a better life. This was also in conjunction with others who wanted to send blacks back to Africa, particularly some whites in the country who didn't like us here. And the location that they wanted to send us back to was a country called Liberia in Western Africa, which is a country largely founded by African Americans or people who are of African descent that are from the Americas. Marcus Garvey was actually from Jamaica, which is obviously in the Caribbean. He was born in 1887, so he's an Afro-Jamaican or African Jamaican. It's like we're African Americans because we're from America. He was born in 1887. He died in 1940 at the age of 52. He did a lot in that short life. Again, he founded the Black Star Line, which is a shipping company. At one point, he had proclaimed himself the provisional president of Africa, which upset some people. We'll talk about in later videos. He was a proponent of Pan-Africanism, Black empowerment, and Black nationalism. Now, Black nationalism, I want to talk about briefly, is basically the idea that people of African descent are one race, whether you're from Africa or whether you are of African descent from another country, which would be a part of the African diaspora we've talked about before. So that all of us are one race and that we should have an identity based off of being a part of that race, and also just take pride in it. And he was a huge proponent of Black nationalism. He was born, like I said, in 1887 into what's called a moderately prosperous family, which basically means he wasn't broke. His dad was a stonemason, which made good money back then. So he was actually a member of a family that wasn't wealthy, but definitely wasn't poor, would be like middle or upper middle class, which was very good, obviously, for a black man, even in Jamaica in the late 1800s. Jamaica at the time was a British colony. It was not its own country. They didn't gain their independence until 1962, which would have been 22 years after he died. So his entire life, Jamaica was a part of the British Empire. To put that in perspective, Jamaica gained its independence in 1962. And 1962 is the year your mom's dad, turned 16. So Jamaica hasn't had their independence very long. His dad was a stonemason. His mom was a domestic servant, which was a housekeeper. And again, that provided them a lifestyle that not a lot of blacks were able to have back at that time, whether it was in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, or in North America, in the United States. Because of his dark skin, he faced prejudice from whites and from his own race. It's hard to explain. I've said that I'm trying very hard to talk positively about race in these videos, but basically there is a sense, and I think we talked about this briefly. There's been a sense in history of the darker you are, the lower class you are. And Marcus Garvey was a dark guy. He was darker than I am. And even I We've talked about like I and William would be considered lower class versus the other members of our family who are lighter. Me and William and even Brandon would be considered a different class because of the color of our skin. Um, so it wasn't just being black; it was also the degree that you were black. It's ridiculous, but it was a part of his life and his identity, and it drove a lot of his future endeavors, including having taking great pride in being black because he was degraded for it for to a large extent. He went to school until he was 14, to a church school. Once he hit 14, his parents couldn't afford to send him to school further. There was like now you can go to school until you're 18 and not have to pay for it in America anyway. Well, back then at 14, you would have to pay for school. And his parents, although they were not poor, did not have enough money to afford for Marcus Garvey to continue to go to school. So what he did was he started apprenticing at a printer. People who printed newspapers and pamphlets, and this is what's going to basically be his career for the rest of his life. As you'll see when we go further and further into his life, printing played a very big role in the things that he did. But he started apprenticing with his godfather at a printer when he turned 14. In 19 okay, so if so at 14 he was I'm sorry, it was around 1901 was when he was 14. That was the year he turned 14 was 1901. So he apprenticed for 4 years. I didn't say he was born in St. Ann's Bay in Jamaica. That's the name of the town he was born in. It was a small town. Kingston was the large town. If I'm not mistaken, it's the capital of Jamaica. So it's a large city. So in 1901, he started apprenticing. He did that for 4 years in St. Ann's Bay and in other places around there. And then in 1905, he actually moved to the big city in Kingston and started working for a printing company. He rose up in the company and actually showed a talent for management and ended up becoming the first black foreman in that company. His I'm sorry, y'all. He was the first black foreman in that company, which a foreman is a manager, basically. So because he was a smart guy and he was good at what he did, he rose up in the company. He was actually able to be a boss, and that was not something common back then, obviously, for black people. And that's pretty much it for his early years. I know I kind of stumbled through this video. I'm going to do better, I promise. The next video, we're going to talk about his activism and his work with trade unions. So anyway, that's the early years. Love you guys, and I will see you in the next video.